I stumbled across this article and thought something needed to be said about such a blatant piece of misleading information. The article, uploaded to the New York Times, is entitled "The Baseless Great Reset Conspiracy Theory Rises Again" by Davey Alba. Already in the article title, textbook gaslighting is being employed. The implication with this title is that the Great Reset is simply a myth, some sort of crackpot theory based on meaningless blips. This simply isn't true. The article starts off, "A baseless conspiracy theory about the coronavirus has found new life as cases surge once again." This is a classic straw man fallacy. It is employed here to make the reader believe that anyone discussing the Great Reset is implying COVID-19 is what's behind it. This also simply isn't true. The article goes on. On Monday morning, the phrase "the Great Reset" trended with nearly 80,000 tweets, with most of the posts coming from familiar far-right internet personalities. The conspiracy alleges that a cabal of elites has long planned for the pandemic so that they could use it to impose their global economic control on the masses. In some versions of the unfounded rumor, it is only President Trump who is thwarting this plan and keeping the scheme at bay. This is, again, a straw man of the actual argument. The Great Reset and its premise are very open narratives, and one can simply Google the term to understand its origin and the tactics those who coined the term are trying to use to get it put in place. One also doesn't have to do much research to find that these plans, specifically the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Internet of Things 5G, were being completed long before any pandemic even started. To make the claim that anyone talking about the Great Reset thinks the virus/pandemic is fake is a classic faulty generalization. The straw man occurs when we take this generalization as fact to then debunk the claims and thus debunk all those who question the narrative, its effectiveness, and its necessity. Also, just as a side note tangent, Trump was rolling out this agenda just as much as the potential for a Biden administration looks to roll it out. Operation Warp Speed should speak for itself. The article goes on. The narrative first took root in late May when Prince Charles and Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, announced plans to convene world leaders and discuss climate change and how to rebuild an economy damaged by the pandemic. The meeting was branded as a Great Reset, and the false rumors about the tight-knit group of elites manipulating the global economy took off. This paragraph is red flag after red flag. Let's propose that the Great Reset was simply a discussion that was started back in May, completely disregarding the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the World Economic Forum's involvement in tech expansion and control years prior. Well then, is the rebuilding of an economy not considered economic manipulation? I'd argue that it is, just objectively. It could be that those taking part in the Great Reset want to do so out of the kindness of their hearts, and they want to restore the world back to order for the benefit of everyone. But it's still economic manipulation, regardless of whether you propose that this is a good or bad thing in general. Following that, the assertion in this paragraph leaves the reader without full context. The World Economic Forum seeks to change the way we live in our everyday lives after the destruction of this pandemic caused. He seeks to rebuild in a way antithetical to our previous way of life, which, whether good or bad, should at least be mentioned by the New York Times if we still care about ethical, fact-based journalism. The article goes on. Then, over the weekend, and into Monday morning, a video of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada speaking from a United Nations meeting in September gained millions of views online. In the video, Mr. Trudeau refers to a Great Reset, and also happened to utter the words "Build Back Better," which conspiracists saw as a tie-in to President-elect Joseph R. Biden Jr., who had used the phrase as a campaign slogan. This paragraph is more lack of context for the reader. On its face, it sounds nuts to say, oh, well, Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau must be rolling out the same agenda. Look, they said the same phrase one time. But that's simply not an accurate depiction of the argument. The phrase, "build back better," traces back to the World Economic Forum's own response to COVID-19, and every major leader of every Western nation is utilizing this phrase in their diplomacy and in their public campaigns. Australia, Britain, the US, and Canada. This also includes the UN utilizing the phrase as well. Now, this isn't definitive proof of correlation, but the blatant connection is there, and it holds much more validity than what the New York Times writer would like you to think. Just the fact that both the Great Reset and the phrase "Build Back Better" originate from the World Economic Forum should say enough in and of itself. The article goes on. Soon, far-right internet commentators with records of spreading misinformation posted about the conspiracy, collecting tens of thousands of likes and shares on Facebook and Twitter. The posters included Paul Joseph Watson, a former contributor to InfoWars, and Steven Crowder, who has falsely asserted that the coronavirus death tolls are inflated. First off, far-right is a slanderous term used to demonize anyone simply discussing information counter to what mainstream news, like the New York Times, says about any given topic, usually associating them with crazy neo-Nazi conspiracy theories or racist propaganda. Anyone on the actual far right, whether authoritarian or libertarian, knows that fiscal conservative neocons like Crowder are not far right, like the New York Times would have you believe. Crowder embodies the average milquetoast conservative, usually a teenager, who holds traditional values on gender roles and abortion and supports Trump, not some neo-Nazi who adamantly hates Trump due to his response in Israel and funding to and from Zionists. Paul Joseph Watson isn't far-right either, though I'd argue further on the political spectrum than Crowder. Watson does nothing more than challenge leftist progressivism and is against globalism, a topic very relevant when discussing the Great Reset. Second, the writer quickly tacks on at the end that COVID-19 death tolls aren't inflated, which we know is false and deserves a swift correction. The CDC's own task force member, Dr. Deborah Birx, said all the way back in April that
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. Prior to that, when there wasn't testing in January and February, that's a very different situation and unknown. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem. Some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
as mass testing with the potential for false positives has only risen since that 7-month-old conference, deaths are inflated. To what extent, we will more than likely never know, nor be able to determine. But we know for a fact that at least some of the death toll is inflated. Objective journalism thrown out the window again from the New York Times. The article goes on. Joanne Donovan, the research director at Harvard University's Shorenstein Center, said, "It is maddening to see the same networks of influencers traffic in recycled conspiracies and get in the way of delivering accurate information to the public. What is true is that COVID is on the rise in the U.S. because of poor leadership and the lack of a nationally coordinated response," Ms. Donovan said. Not only is this an unfinished quote, which is not a very good look coming from the New York Times, but it fails to provide any context to people nor any accurate information. New York Times, putting their anti-Trump spin on things, of course, says COVID-19 is on the rise due to poor leadership and the lack of a nationally coordinated response. The irony, of course, is that the response were meant to be local, and for the vast majority they were. Trump can't just abuse his federal power and demand states legally require mask wearing, social distancing, and lockdowns. That's not his right. It's the states' right, and the states all acted in their own different ways as a result. To say it was poor national leadership is to move the goalpost entirely. It wasn't the national leader's job to enforce or implement the mandates and requirements put in place to stop the spread, and that's even implying lockdowns, social distancing, and masks were effective, which clearly they were not. The article finishes. Twitter said the tweets about the conspiracy did not violate its rules and that the Great Reset was no longer trending. Facebook did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The final 2 lines were obviously an attempt to get big tech to censor the story and any questions surrounding it. But good on Twitter and Facebook for not immediately censoring. That must be a first of some kind. Ultimately, I want to make it very clear that what these media outlets are doing is wrong. We have long since destroyed the credibility of journalism and mainstream news due to people and articles like these. The idea that you can take one crackpot conspiracy theory brewed up by one singular example of a crazy QAnon Trump fan and that can be generalized to the entire questioning of something as open and as obvious as the Great Reset agenda, is ludicrous. The New York Times is so clearly showing their true intentions with such an outlandish article like this one. They're showing that they could care less about objective journalism and providing verified information and sources to the public. They'd rather cherry-pick, strawman, generalize, and ultimately censor those who seek to voice an opinion or even question the narrative. It's sad, it's embarrassing, and it needs to be called out.